This could destroy the company.
The company? Who cares about the company? What about us? That thing is a killing machine!
And welcome back to another episode of F.O.R.D.E. You'll have to forgive my voice because it's feeling a bit under the weather at the moment. So welcome to the special, very special, episode 10 ASMR version of F.O.R.D.E. It's not ASMR. But my old voice is cranking a bit, but I still gotta record because I need to stick to a schedule. How you doing, everyone? You doing good? Doing swell? It's episode 10! We made it to the double digits of this wonderful, wonderful, excellent series. You're probably doing especially swell since today we're tackling a map from Thracia, which you'd already know if you managed to solve my horrifying anagram of Rat Dreadnought, meh, which of course translates to Mother and Daughter, otherwise known as Chapter 5 of Thracia. A less than great chapter. But before we go any further, I'll just establish this, that both this and the next episode of F.O.R.D.E. are part of a mini challenge that I set for myself, where I had to talk about a Thracia map that I didn't like, as well as a Three Houses map that I did like. So it took me a little bit to think about it, but I've managed to find both of the episodes at this point, so they're both my choice. Sorry, no requests for these two episodes. So stay tuned for next week's episode, because won't that be a treat? He said with gritted teeth as he had to record a bunch of Three Houses footage. Anyway, let's get into the chapter at hand. Let's get into Mother and Daughter. This strange chapter. It's not. I feel like this chapter gets a lot of guff, but it's not quite as bad as everyone says, I think. Anyway, yeah, let's begin. Starting off with flavor, as always. Yeah, as much as people like to proclaim that they despise everything about this chapter, it's like, oh, it's unfair. Like, it's really, like, it's boring. Well, that part is true. It's like, oh, the arena's like, it's a gimmick. But, like, as much as people like to give this chapter a lot of reasonable, like, guff and critique, I would be objectively incorrect if I said that its flavor was an absolute disaster. As, without a doubt, it's probably the chapter's only feature that actually succeeds without any guilty pleasure bias, so to say. This is another one of those chapters that has separated your army into two groups, namely Leif's band of criminals and 12-year-old mages, plus Nana and Abel fighting for their fucking life in the center of the map against hordes of pit fighters and potentially Galzus and Marita. Now, normally, when you have your characters split up in such a way, it can feel either arbitrary or unbalanced. For example, in 4 Endgame 2 of the Tower in Radiant Dawn, where Ike is separated from the rest of your army to fight the Black Knight, I think that chapter can feel a little bit janky on the Ike versus the Black Knight side, since Ike outclasses him so, like, heavily in stats and combat capability that it doesn't really feel like a duel. It just feels like Ike going full Looney Tunes on the Black Knight and bonking him over and over again with a hammer, and it can potentially be over in like 3 turns. It doesn't really work very well. Here though, I actually really like that it genuinely feels as though Abel is using every last ounce of her strength to protect Nana from the pit fighters. I think it like genuinely gets that point across quite well. Due to the format of the arena and the overall strength of the enemies, the chapter really effectively evokes the feeling of getting worn down and exhausted, as it doesn't matter how many of those heroes and generals and warriors and swordmasters that you kill, more are going to spawn, and you're eventually going to lose if you don't manage to rescue Abel and Nana with your main army. I also really appreciate how the foes gradually get stronger in the sense that if you kill too many of the lower level combatants, you're eventually going to trigger Galzus to spawn, which very much works as an, like, okay, we're done playing, Mr. Player moment, and it just tells the player to hurry the fuck up, because we have basically just deposited this tactical nuke onto the map. You have around 3 turns before he obliterates you. Like, Galzus here almost works as the Silver Sword Myrmidon in this version of the arena, acting as the final hurdle that you have absolutely no way of clearing, and will arguably need to use, like, underhanded tactics in order to defeat, aka opening the door with Leif. Like, if you play fair, you're going to lose, which is that's rule 1 of Thracia, which is if you're playing by the rules and not playing dirty, then you're playing Thracia wrong. The game wants you to hit under the belt. Yeah, the more I think about the flavor of this chapter, the more I actually consider it to be really great. Like, it begins with an immediate ticking clock element with Nana and Abel in the center of the map, and you having to rush to the door, which adds a great sense of desperation and anxiety to your progression. and it's constantly evolving with the conversations between Raedric and Veld in the center of the map, as well as Marita appearing, and eventually Abel getting turned to stone. Like, the flavor on this map just works really, really well. It's really excellent from a storytelling perspective. Definitely its biggest strength. It's a concept that could absolutely be done poorly, but I think it succeeds super effectively here. Having a clear beginning, middle, and maybe the end isn't done as like effectively as possible, but like it has a very strong beginning and middle to its story gameplay integration. Like, it's done really, really well. Big old thumbs up for this one. Definite pass for flavor. Now on to O, objective. A lot of the factors that I praised in flavor will also apply to the same category, as it's a pretty story-heavy chapter. So the devs made sure to intertwine the gameplay and storytelling pretty nicely. This means that while the chapter is the usual affair of escaping with all of your units, as is tradition in Manster, I believe literally every single Manster arc chapter is an escape chapter, it almost effectively has like a totally different objective for the first half of the chapter with rescuing Abel, which I think is pretty neat. Obviously this isn't the actual objective, so you could argue that I shouldn't be giving it credit, as like it is entirely possible to just ignore Abel and her many plights. You can just leave her to die if you want. It's not I don't believe it's a game over if Abel dies. You can just, well, let me establish this. Abel literally can't die, if you are unaware, for the viewer at home. Abel is literally invincible for the entire early game. Like, chapter 1, 2, 2 Guide, and 3, and this chapter all have, like, a hidden little skill for Abel, where she's completely immortal. She can't die. It's like Hyper Miracle Plus, in a way, where if she would take lethal damage, she will dodge. I'm almost, like, wondering if that's why the game is fixed at 99 and 1 hit, just so you could think, wow, I got crazy lucky. She dodged like 3 99s in a row. Holy fuck. Whereas, like, the goblins in the code are like, nah, she's invincible. But anyway, I feel as though the majority of players rather like Abel as a character, so I think it's fair to count it as a main objective. Like, 99.9% of players are going to go and rescue Abel. Quote, rescue Abel. They're going to open the door and watch her get, like, petrified. It's still, like, the natural progression. And this also presents, like, a pretty unique, evolving objective, which happens surprisingly rarely in Fire Emblem, so I'll give credit for that. But I feel as though this constantly shifting set of objectives, while really nice for the first half of the map, only really applies to the first half of the map. As once you've opened the door to the pit in the center of the map and Abel gets turned to, like, Rocky Road, the map basically remains the same for the rest of its duration. And what you're left with is a very, very stale chapter, plagued with long, boring hallways that don't actually offer the player anything outside of heavy travel times. I've talked about pretty much everything that the map does, like, reasonably well at this point, so let's start going through the long list of negatives, shall we? Similar to Unbroken Heart and a lot of castle maps in the series in general, Mother and Daughter is cursed with the issue of not having a whole lot going on. After the arena escapades are over, you're left with just cleaning up what's left of the castle, as both of the bosses have disappeared. There's like a mini-boss on the top, but like he's super forgettable. He's just one of those like no-names. So there are no bosses, and what you're left with is just around 4 to 5 like pods of enemies. And when I say pods, I'm comparing them to the term pods from the game XCOM, if you're familiar, where enemies will move in groups rather than one big unit. A pod in XCOM is around 2 to 3 enemies, I believe. They're aliens. You should play XCOM. Go and play XCOM. It's a much better series than Fire Emblem. XCOM 3 will never exist. But yeah, it's really apparent here, because it really feels like the same type of formations from XCOM. And it works nicely there, because XCOM, I believe like 99% of XCOM maps have Fog of War. Maybe all of them. But here, you can very much see all of the pods of like, okay, the top one has like 5 archers and the generic mini-boss. There's like 10 mages in the bottom left. There's like 2 Armor Knights and 2 Like, it feels very like almost ROM hackish. It feels very amateurish. As while the enemies do have like some form of like cohesion and formation, it feels very formulaic to just have like, oh, there's the archer pod, there's the mage pod, there's the Armor Knight pod. Like, sticking 10 mages at the end of the map isn't an interesting objective to deal with, plain and simple. It's just like mowing the lawn. It's really just not interesting in the slightest. When you pair this with some, like, honestly, like, insulting travel times, it makes for a really dull map. Now, a quick mention of side objectives. I wouldn't really classify Abel as a side objective herself, as we mentioned earlier, as she functions as the primary drive for the chapter, which means that side objectives are relegated to the usual chests and stealable items. There's no droppables in Thracia, so it's relegated to just stealables, and maybe capturables. And let's be real, the chests in this map are genuinely some of the worst in Thracia. But there's one in particular. We'll get to it in a sec. If you are familiar with this chapter at all, you probably know like which chest I'm talking about. There's like, I believe, 2 or 3 chests on the left side of the map, which are never in any danger. There's no like thieves coming for them or anything, which is like fine. It's like a nice reward after waiting through enemies. It's like a C or C+ in terms of side objectives in that regard. That's fine. I have no issues with that. What I do have an issue with is the chest that's located all the way in the bottom right corner of the map. Meaning that you will have to send one of your units on around like a 4 to 5 turn trip to go and get that magic ring, which is a very valuable item, you want that, and then like another 6 to 7 turns to get all the way back. There's no other way to put it. It's fucking stupid and insulting. There is absolutely no reason for that chest to be all the way out there. It adds fucking nothing. What did Karga mean by this? Yeah, this category is a little tricky overall, because I do really like the arena as a set piece for the chapter. I think it works really nice as a spectacle for the player, like engaging with the chapter for the first time. But outside of that, Mother and Daughter is probably the weakest of the Monster Arc chapters in terms of things to do. Like, it's very much just a case of walk down the straight path provided for you and deal with whatever enemies cross your path. Nothing else really happens. I can't in good conscience give this category a pass when it pretty much just lacks side objectives as a whole, and is mostly just very uninteresting to play. The arena is cool, the rest of the chapter is not. Moving on to replayability, there is a bunch of chapters in Thracia that have excellent replayability. Like, right off the top of my head, Chapter 4 is one of the best chapters in the series for replayability, due to how it, like, randomizes the items that you bring in. You can bring in tons of different items. You can bring in tons if you want, you can bring in nothing and speed up your trip. Like, the reinforcements are a little bit random, which is kind of nice, and the movement starts. Like, that chapter does replayability excellently. We'll get to Chapter 4. I've seen requests for that chapter, I'll just say this now. I haven't done Chapter 4, because I don't want to blow my load and do all of the good chapters at the start of this show. I want to save some good ones for later. So, Chapter 4 will be done at some point. I'd love to talk about it, but for now, I want to, like, keep some gas in the tank, so to say. So yeah, the dungeon, or Chapter 4, has a bunch of really, really good factors and features that make that chapter just a blast to play with every playthrough. However, with Mother and Daughter, the replayability is somehow both very uninteresting and also kind of a disaster. I don't really need to go over why exactly the chapter is so boring again, we've already talked about it. So we'll just move on to the messy part of the chapter, that being the extreme variation of how strong you can be going into this chapter. For those uninitiated, I've always maintained the opinion that Thracia should not be played blind, as there is a metric fuck ton of nonsense that the game is going to throw your way. And if you don't know about it, it can make your playthrough absolutely miserable. With this chapter being a great example of that. For instance, if you didn't get Chapter 4 Gaiden, you won't get Asvel, who is arguably the strongest unit in the game combat-wise, and you also won't get the Brave Sword, which is one of 4 brave weapons in the game. Well, there's a bunch of like breath weapons, but it's a very important weapon to have, making your combat significantly weaker, as you have both one less brave weapon and no consistent 1 to 2 range way to deal with the mages on this map. Furthermore, it's also possible that you didn't know about the Monster Arc to begin with, so you didn't itemize your Leaf or Lithis, if you even got Lithis because he came from a Gaiden chapter. It's possible that you didn't itemize either of them properly, meaning that you might not have stuff like the Flame Sword or the Brave Axe, or you bought in a bunch of like unnecessary garbage, like Vulneraries or like Iron Swords, and it made Chapter 4 a fucking nightmare. When you pair this with the already kind of unreliable units you have, like Brighton and Martua, like Martua's damage is kind of low and Brighton like has Wrath, but he won't double like anything meaningfully, and his accuracy is always like 70% and maybe like 60s, so he's very iffy. Like when you pair that with the incredibly standard map design of just tumbling down a corridor, it makes for a chapter with very, very poor replayability. Out of all the chapters in Thracia, not even just the Monster Arc, I think this might be the one I like dread replaying the most. Not because it's a difficult chapter that I'm like, ooh, I might stumble and fall. No, because it's fucking long and boring. Some maps need incredibly verbose explanations for how they function or why they succeed. Not here. The chapter, it's long and boring. Me no want to play it again. Moving on. Replayability, complete fail. Now for difficulty, the difficulty for Mother and Daughter, much like a lot of its other aspects, is also comparable to Unbroken Heart, with a few key differences here and there. However, predominantly, the map isn't really offering that much of a challenge for the player to overcome overall. While the enemy density is perfectly fine, the way they're split up from each other and the general level of strength is really just lacking any punch. I find that the only reason I'll ever play defensively on this chapter is because I forgot to put weapons on my weaker units like Karin and Lara, which is absolutely, like, that's a personal thing. I can't really attribute that to difficulty. That's just me being a forgetful bitch. I see a lot of people say, like, this chapter is, like, unfair, and it's really, really tough and challenging. Like, I'm sorry, I don't see it. Like, there's basically no reinforcements. There's one siege tome, which is really telegraphed. You know it's coming. It's very unlikely that he'll be able to one-shot any of your units. The middle, while cool, is a set piece, like, through and through. It's very much fixed, and it's really cool to look at, but there's ultimately no real difficulty there. So I'm not really sure where all of the complaints for difficulty from this map come from. Please inform me. Maybe I'm just misinformed. I would love to hear about people's genuine qualms with this chapter that I simply don't understand. But as I mentioned earlier, there is one key difference to Unbroken Heart in that you, as a player, absolutely have some control over how tough the map can be, and how well you've prepared for it. Unbroken Heart is like, it's fixed. You go in with Ephraim, Ford, Kyle, and Orson, like you have no previous influence over that chapter. Like, for example, in Sacred Stones, going from chapter 4 to chapter 5, you can influence how strong your units are going to be, because your units are the same going from chapter 4 to chapter 5, whereas chapter 5 to chapter 5 Gaiden, they're not the same. You get what I mean. On your first playthrough, it's entirely possible that you weren't aware of factors like Gaiden chapters, or the fact that Abel is invincible, which will make the chapter much, much harder for a newcomer. And I'm not sure it's portrayed in a very enjoyable way. Like I've said before, it's not exactly terrific game design to have the majority of your difficulty be locked behind knowledge checks, constantly making sure that the player is keeping up with hidden mechanics, otherwise they get punished with a significant leap in difficulty. I'd much rather just have a consistently hard chapter, like a chapter 7 in FE6, or a ghost ship in Sacred Stones. Ghost ship is, like, it can be a bit finicky with Fog of War and not really knowing where the reinforcements come from, but that is a challenging chapter. By turning your difficulty into what is effectively just a checklist of things that the player needs to keep up on, it turns the map into a chore, in my opinion, rather than something I'd actually want to play. I can't give difficulty a success. It's definitely a fail. And on to our final category, E, Enjoyability. I'll be completely honest. The only enjoyment I get out of this chapter is watching Asvel grow, because I like Asvel a lot, and this is a great chapter for him to just gain a bunch of levels. That's literally it. Mother and daughter effectively act as, like, the secondary school section of Asvel's growth period, with chapter 4 Gaiden being his primary school, and chapter 6 being his graduation where he promotes. That is, like, the long and arduous journey of Asvel, his 3-chapter journey to go from mage to sage, and gain his ability to kill everything that enters his sightline. It might seem kind of simple to a lot of people, or kind of trivial, but just placing Asvel on that left wall at the start of the map, and watching him slowly whittle down the population of mages in Manster is always a treat for me to watch. I absolutely adore it. Please deposit your XP directly into my child's ever-growing maw, for he hungers, and who am I to deny him his food? Aside from that, there really isn't a whole lot to do on the map, outside of just going through the typical motions of a Fire Emblem map. Sure, the ludonarrative stuff with Abel is a really cool spectacle that I will admit does actually hold up on repeat playthroughs, but the rest of the map is just so lukewarm that I can't really talk about this for that long without getting bored. I'm gonna be completely honest. There isn't that much enemy variety, it's basically just Armor Knights and Mages with the occasional, like, Archer or Sniper here and there. There will be a fair amount of turns where your only actions will be the old FE4 special of just traveling towards the objective and not engaging in combat at all. And as I mentioned, the difficulty isn't so high that you'll feel genuinely challenged. Like, the difficulty in this chapter doesn't feel... Like, if we go on a scale of, like, 1 to 5, with 1 being like, oh, it wasn't stimulating at all, this was basically just a chapter to gain XP. Whereas 5 is like, I was sweating the entire time. This chapter's like a 2.5, I'd say. There's, like, occasional, like, woo, there's a siege tome, that's scary, or woo, there's a lot of promoted enemies in the center, woo, that's scary, or I don't know about all the gimmicks of this chapter. Otherwise, it's very, very plain, very, very straightforward. There just isn't enough going on in this map to really excel in any way outside of its storytelling with the arena. That's a fail for enjoyability. Wow, 1 out of 5, that's rough. that's gonna wrap it up for this episode, because one, because my voice can't take much more, and two, because there really isn't that much else to talk about. Mother and Daughter is kind of an unfortunate map. I've compared it a bunch to Unbroken Heart, and it did get the same score as it, with 1 out of 5 categories succeeding. I would say it succeeds at flavor much better than Unbroken Heart does, because Unbroken Heart's a very safe chapter, whereas this is a bit more experimental, and it does succeed in its experimental nature, so that's cool. But also, unlike Unbroken Heart, it really feels like this map could succeed if it improved its weaker areas. Just introduce some engaging difficulty and make it so the chests are in ludicrous positions. Just very, very simple minor fixes, stuff like that. Instead, you're left with a chapter which works very well as like a cinematic storytelling icon. Like, if there was a Thracia remake in the style of Echoes, this chapter would be excellent. I'm sure people would love this chapter because it's like cutscenes and dialogue galore, and probably really great voice acting performances, showcasing Abel's bravery to throw hands with our mind-controlled daughter. It'd be fucking sick. But like, outside of the admittedly really good storytelling, it just falls flat on its face once that whole affair is done and dusted, leaving you with a very, 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 very dull romp through the castle. Now, as for our Anagram, while you might know which game it's going to be, you'll still have to figure out which chapter it's going to be, and there's still like 60 plus chapters in Three Houses, even if a bunch of them are repeats. So make sure you pay attention closely, viewer, to our Anagram this time, as it is none other than the awe-inspiring After Hawk War. Again, for those in the back, After Hawk War. Alright, that's going to be it for me and my dying throat for this week. Hopefully it's better next week. I'll catch you next time, guys. Hope you enjoyed as usual. Yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye.